So the first one I'm going to go with is from Eric at the Mindful Physio. He asks how he thinks athletic training can grow and improve, and thoughts on it becoming a master's entry-level program. I think to discuss this, the first thing I have to do is identify what I would consider the problems with the field. Plenty of times on Clinical Athlete, we talk about general problems with the rehab field, disparity in education, disparity in techniques. All of those things kind of span all of health and fitness. But I really think athletic training in and of itself has a couple individual problems that are unique to athletic training. The first one, which you'll see in a lot of research, especially from back in the early 2000s from the NATA, is a really high burnout rate. Athletic trainers work a ton of hours with not a whole lot of reward. So you see a lot of people around the ages of 28 to 32 leave the field. Some of that is family work conflict. Some of it is going to a different career. From my graduating class, I think half of us now are still ATs. The other half have gone on to be PAs. They've dropped out and become personal trainers, but they've let their certification lapse and they're no longer in the field. The other thing, I think they really lack any level of autonomy. You've seen PT really kind of take the lead on this, and with direct access and a few other things, and now the doctorate level program, they have left athletic training behind by leaps and bounds because we still require a physician's signature to practice and a physician's supervision to practice, which makes it so that our field in and of itself and our professionals are not autonomous. We require another person to actually practice. That can make things really sticky, especially in some of the settings that we work in, which is the last problem. For the longest time, and I don't view it as this anymore, but for the longest time, athletic training and physical therapists have always been butting heads and number one competitors with one another. And one of the biggest problems, if you look at the statistics, is we are employed by our competition. Athletic trainers are 40% employed by clinics and about another 20% employed by secondary schools. Sometimes that's as a teacher. So you're working 2 full-time jobs basically, or you're being contracted by a clinic led by physical therapists out into secondary schools. So those are the problems that I identify. The solution, the solution that I find viable, a lot of people really don't like. First off, we've spent 20 years trying to get everybody to understand what an athletic trainer is and doing this whole campaign as to like get our name right. The problem that I find with that is that we haven't created enough value as professionals to even push that message forward enough. There's too many times that your first experience with an athletic trainer in high school is they just stretched and iced me and I had to go somewhere else. We don't get results. So people aren't going to remember what your name is if you're not doing the job that you're being asked to do. I think there needs to be more master's level programs, more doctorate level programs. But ultimately, and this is the really unpopular part, I really feel like the APTA and the NATA should actually join forces. And athletic training should be a specialty track in PT school, because it solves the autonomy problem. And I know people are just going to send me so much hate mail for that, but it solves so many problems that we have as athletic trainers when it comes to solving the autonomy problem. There's a lot of PTs that are getting into emergency sports medicine and volunteering at schools and taking those jobs anyway. And it also would probably help with some of the burnout and some of the hours and some of the lack of reward in the amount of time that you actually spend. So that's my take. What do you guys think?
Quinn, you go.
John, so while you were talking about, especially about the competition or butting heads between professions, it kind of got me thinking about when I was in physical therapy school, in Indiana, that was one of the last states to get any type of direct access. And they didn't actually have it when I was in physical therapy school. And the chiropractors would actually be in the state hall legislating against us getting direct access.
Yeah.
and that's no knock on them. It's just one of those turf war things, and
Yeah.
physicians do the same thing or medical doctors do the same thing to chiropractors, and then they were doing, kind of lobbying against us getting direct access, and then continuing down the line, I get emails from the California Physical Therapy Association asking their members, physical therapists, to vote against, petition against, etc., different legislative bills that are trying to be passed to give athletic trainers more autonomy in our state. So It's like we're doing the same thing. It's just like, somebody's stomping on their head, and just kind of like down the chain. Is the certification process, NADA is a national entity. Is the certification process any different from state to state, or is anybody who refers to themselves as a certified athletic trainer abide by the same criteria?
So you have to pass the BOC exam. Now, a few years ago, BOC and NATA separated. So now the BOC, the Board of Certification, is actually a separate entity from the NATA. Any state in the country, you have to pass that test to go and try to get registered or licensed or anything like that. I believe California is the only one that still does not have licensure.
That's that's what I was getting at, and I wasn't sure about that.
And there's one further. Texas, where most everybody actually gets paid the most, has their own certification and licensure exam. And it's apparently really hard. Really, really hard. Yeah. But they've taken even more steps. But from there, it really depends. It's state to state, pretty much like any other type of regulation. But
what are your thoughts on California not having the athletic trainers not being licensed? Because I actually was hesitant to I thought it was a negative thing as I'm getting these emails. I was like, vote against athletic trainers getting autonomy. But then I knew that as part of it too. So I was like, well, maybe there's merit to that. What does the license, is that give some type of status, or do you feel like a practitioner would be safer in another state because they have a license versus a state in which they don't? Does that matter?
I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you.
No.
I know, at least for the state of Maryland, it offers you a few protections. One of the biggest ones being that nobody else can claim to be an athletic trainer. But unfortunately, that's just not a topic that I have a whole lot of knowledge on, because I don't see a lot of the negative end of how the licensure protects you or that sort of thing. So that's probably for somebody else to answer.
Well, I think that may be part of the problem too, is like different, and with physical therapy, different states, every state is different as far as the Practice Act and these types of things. And then you've got more of a national entity with the BOC, but then you've got these states that are different, kind of on the fringe. It's just like nothing is uniform. There's just so much heterogeneity with both professions, really. Especially when you start thinking about the curriculums and what we're coming out with knowledge-wise. So when I first had experience with athletic trainers, it was always in the training room in college or high school. But you work in a different setting than that. And I think that is maybe not familiar to a lot of people. I think when people think athletic trainer, they do think tape and ankles, high school training room, the typical, stereotypical type deal. How did you get into the setting that you're in now?
So it's a longer story than I'd probably like to tell. But it started in grad school when I had players getting a lot of soft tissue injury. And the first thing, as somebody who lifted weights all the time, the first thing I started to look at is, what are you doing outside of playing baseball? Because that was the first place I was. So we started looking at their training programs. We started to try to modify those things. And as a grad assistant athletic trainer, that's kind of frowned upon when you have a strength staff that's kind of well embedded. So I took that on, and because of that, one of the supervising ATs at Penn State took that as a bit of a plus. Andra Thomas, she's still one of my mentors, and she took me on for soccer my second year, and I basically just started implementing that. So I would go in the morning and I would do all treatments, and then for about 2 hours it'd be me and a select group of the guys who were frequently injured, we'll probably say that, with a lot of soft tissue stuff, and we would train hard. And we started seeing those injuries decrease. And as time went on, and I graduated, I wanted to find a place where I could actually spend that time treating as opposed to trying to prevent, right? With like the taping and the stretching and all that kind of stuff. I wanted a place where I had a little bit more freedom. So I jumped onto a clinic staff and was actually working at a high school first until I started to establish some value in the actual clinic. And that's when we started to come up with the program that I currently have. So I had designed that myself from the ground up.
So, one reason I asked that question is because it's possible to work. It's possible to do what you're doing, as an athletic trainer. You have options. I've also, last question here from my end, because I'm actually curious about, this is, I've known a couple athletic trainers in different states that it was my understanding that they actually ran pseudo autonomously, and they just had a physician sign off on a lot of their documentation, but wasn't actually necessarily in-house all the time. Is that a thing that happens? Am I making that up?
No, you're not making that up.
Okay.
All you need is a physician signature, right? But they're your supervising physician, so that they take responsibility as well. So if something were to happen, then they don't have to be in-house like a PT and a PTA who have to be pretty much at the same time in the same building with the same patients. Because of the travel that's involved with athletic training, a lot of the times you're not going to have a physician there all the time with you. So they sign off on what you're capable of doing, and that eval and treat protocol that we get that they sign off on, it actually has boxes that they can fill out and say, you're able to do this and this and this and this and this, so that you're covered. But if shit hits the fan, they are partly responsible for that kind of thing. So they take some risk on by doing it as well. If that answers your question.
Yeah, got you. Jared, you got anything on this?
I was glad that you took the lead with the questions, because I don't have a lot of experience with working with athletic trainers up here, and I also think that some of the nuances of legislation are different. I know there are differences from province to province, but probably my guess, and I can't say this for sure, but my guess would be that they're probably less pronounced than some of the differences from state to state. So hearing that conversation between you and John was really interesting. John, let's say you're right. Let's say you do get some serious flack or hate mail, but say that there's some people who agree with you. What would you advise them on in terms of steps to take to try to catalyze what you think is the way forward here?
I think the first thing you have to do is go to the NATA with it. And you have to show them. I mean, I think they've done quite a bit of research to show some of the things that I've stated, especially the high rate of burnout and attrition in the actual field. The lack of autonomy is something they've tried to fight for a long time. So I think it makes sense. The problem is the competition. We had a hit the hill day back in college, and it was, you're walking down the hall to the same representatives, and you got a guy with a PT badge on, trying to say the exact opposite of what you're about to say.
Right.
So you'd have to get over some deeply inherent biases to get those people to team up together. But I would say go to the NATA first, or go to your state board first, and at least start the conversation.